Hello everyone, my name is Evan Knoll and I'm going to be discussing the government of Afghanistan and comparing it to the government of the United States. So to introduce the government of Afghanistan, it's an Islamic republic which is similar to the United States except it's more led by religious law, which the government of the United States is not led by religious law whatsoever. So in the top left we have a picture of the Durrani Empire, which shows one of the forms of government that was present earlier, an empire. And then in the middle, we have a picture of nomads during the 1900s. This was during a time of monarchy in Afghanistan. And in the lower left, we have the present, formerly led by a terrorist, currently under that Islamic Republic, like I mentioned earlier. So some of the background on Afghanistan, we start out with a picture of the Taliban. They ruled until 2001, and then U.S. soldiers came in and sort of overthrew that government. You can see the soldier high-fiving the little girl in the bottom left, and we have some ruins that they left behind. And that is that leads us to why they needed the the republic that they thus established. More diplomacy pictured on the top here with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. And this sort of is a good similarity or difference point between the two countries. The United States hasn't had to deal with insurgencies and these injustices committed against them. They haven't had to reform their governments or be conquered. Afghanistan was conquered by Alexander the Great, Muslim Arabs, the British, several different people. The United States hasn't really had to go through any of that. So some of the constitutions, the Constitution of Afghanistan was adopted in 2004, very similar to the United States Constitution, set up the legislative, executive, and judicial branch, which is basically the structure of the government in Afghanistan. They even have a system of checks and balances, not called the same thing, but very similar. And then there are several underlying similarities and differences between the two constitutions, with the legislative, executive, and judicial powers, but we're going to get into a little bit more of that later, okay? So the politics have been strongly influenced by the United States and other NATO countries. Something important to note about Afghanistan is it's ever evolving and ever changing. So originally, this was something that was very interesting to me. Originally, there were no political parties basically whatsoever. All they had were independent candidates. So the first president, Hamid Karzai, and then his successor, Ashraf Ghani, who is the current president. They've only had two since 2001. They both were elected as independent candidates. And, now they do have more parties. They have the National Coalition of Afghanistan, the National Front of Afghanistan, but they really haven't made a dent in Afghan politics. They're more extreme and more radical. And really, if you want to get elected here, you pretty much have to be an independent, which is very different. In the United States, you either have to be Democrat or Republican. Another difference is that when these elections occur, they're generally someone runs away with a majority of the votes, and a few other candidates get a sliver of the votes, And in the United States, it's usually about split evenly, about half and half down the middle. So that's another difference that I saw between politics. Another thing is they're also much less contentious in Afghanistan. There's not as many hard feelings. People don't really care as much about who gets elected and why they get elected. So moving into the legislative branch, it's a bicameral legislature held in the National Assembly comparable to Congress, and then the Walesi Hurga is the lower house, similar to the House of Representatives, more representative of the people. The Mashrano Hurga is the upper house, House of the Elders, comparable to the U.S. Senate. So up here we have a picture of down here we have a picture of the National Assembly building, and then the Walesi Hurga, which is the one that's similar to the House of Representatives, are pictured at the top left. All right, so the executive powers the executive branch is very similar to that of the executive branch in the United States. Has the president of the cabinet. Obviously, there's fewer agencies in the Afghanistan cabinet because it's a smaller country, so it doesn't require as many agencies. Another difference, very notable difference, is that in Afghanistan, the president is elected by a direct election, whereas in the United States, we have more of a representative sort of election with the Electoral College. And another similarity between them is that the duties of the president are very similar. We have the duties of commander-in-chief, head of state, head diplomat. All that is sort of encompassed into that role. And, we have Ashraf Ghani in the two top corners. He's the current president, and then Hamid Karzai, the first president of Afghanistan, is pictured below. So the judicial branch is pretty similar to the United States judicial branch. We have the Supreme Court, which is pictured on the left. 9 justices. They have a chief justice. In the picture, they're mostly male, but actually the Afghanistan Supreme Court is noted for being fairly diverse. They have actually a lot of women on their Supreme Court, so that's something they're doing, proving they're pretty much a progressive country. So the way it's split is between the Supreme Court, the High Courts, and the Appeals Court. They're pretty comparable to the federal, state, and local levels, except the appeals court is more of a combination of state and local. And within that, appeals and the federal, and the appeals and the high courts, you have several different courts, such as a national security court, things of that sort. So it really gets broken down into a lot of different segments and pieces when you look at that. Then on the right, we have the Supreme Court building in Kabul. So to conclude, the government of Afghanistan has had to go through several different changes throughout the years, but it is currently, trying to get on that path towards democracy and sort of following in the footsteps of the United States government and trying to replicate the success that they've had with their form of government. So thank you guys for listening to my presentation.